Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome back to our weekly updates of the presidential election map and model for 2020. Not really going to talk too much about Senate races because nothing significant has changed, at least in those. I'm going to do a little bit of combing because there may be that recent public policy polling map. I'm going to go ahead and check that on Suzanne Collins because I believe they actually did release a poll. And if they did, I will record it. I think I'm looking at the way they broke down the data on 538's site. It looks like they did a national poll, but that's not actually the case. They did a poll of Maine and they broke it down by district, which really makes it easy. And it makes me think that yes, Donald Trump actually does still maintain some level of credibility and viability in the second congressional district, and likely in a close election, he'd win that. Even down by 5, he'd win that just because of the nature of how close the state has become. And it may just be his style. It may just be weirdness. I don't 100% know for certain. We'll find out more information as things unfold. Of course, this Ukraine thing, it's only moved his approval ratings by about maybe 0.5% on average from his worst, which there's about a 1% width that he's been floating around where he's in the mid 45s to the to the mid 44s. He's on that lower end of that spectrum and even slightly below it on average, based off of the approval rating polls, which is really tanking him. However, the disapproval polls are actually shooting up more on average. So his approval rating is holding very steady. It's just the disapproval rating is increasing a lot because there's a lot of people who are, on the fence about it. Now, I don't think approval rating polls are 100% accurate, but it's what we have right now, so it's what we're going to be using. Just because there aren't enough high quality polls of the general, and even then, this far out, they're still a bit iffy in some cases. As we get closer, they get much better. But with Donald Trump, we have no earthly idea what is going to happen. So it's kind of just a crapshoot at this point. So I'm using a lot of fundamentals. Like if you take out all the fundamentals, you're gonna and go to just the polling average. We're looking at, yeah, outside the economy is doing fairly well, but we'll see whether that matters. And you can actually comb through and see, yeah, not doing too hot in Alaska, definitely not. Arizona, Florida's pretty bad. Georgia's just holding water. Uh, Minnesota, Minnesota's pretty bad. Michigan isn't appallingly bad, but it's pretty bad. Ohio is, Pennsylvania's surprisingly close, but also not really, not where he wants it to be. Uh, Texas is for him at least. Virginia, yeah, that's about where it should be. Maybe a little bit too wide, but then again, maybe not. It's been 4 years since it was only slightly closer than that. But you can go through this data on your own. I'm using the forecast page, which includes all the fundamentals, which I use to kind of balance out just a lot of the noise and also kind of give it as a dummy to make sure that we're not overreacting to polls. And that's why I use a rolling average, and that's why I use so many averages. To, yeah, and that's why I also balance it out with the partisanship of a state, that type of thing. So this isn't too crazy a map. Interesting result is Kansas right here. Alaska dipping into that territory. North Carolina and Georgia are extremely close. But this is still a surprisingly winnable election for Donald Trump because all the states that are in the tilt blue category are well within 3%. well, maybe not well within it, but they're within about 3 to 4%. That is winnable in any election. 3 to 4% is well within the margin of error because that's actually a good 3 to 4% is considered a good margin of error credibility interval. Basically, what that means is a 6 to 8 point spread or swing. If it was to go fully the other direction, that is considered credible. So, yeah, we're talking about a potential 6 point swing, and that would put states like Colorado in play, New Mexico in play, Nevada in play, certainly Minnesota in play, Delaware in play. Some of these states like Connecticut or Rhode Island, they'd at least become competitive. But they'd also put a state, say, Missouri competitive, Mississippi competitive. They'd certainly make South Carolina competitive. Montana would be competitive. It'd swing. It'd swing Texas or Georgia, North Carolina fairly easy. It'd swing Maine second. It might even make the Dakotas somewhat competitive, or and Indiana would be competitive under that situation. I'm just trying to make sure I cover my bases and explain that these things, it matters, but we also have to take everything with a grain of salt. And that 3 to 4% is at about 95% confidence, which is considered acceptable. You can call it a margin of error or where the standard deviation lies. You can call it a credibility interval. Basically, it's where they expect 95% of outcomes to be, is within 3 to 4% of everyone's reported numbers. Because the truth is, no sample in statistics is ever going to be 100% accurate. You're never going to get 100% accuracy. Because statistics, you always need context in order to properly understand what's going on. A good example would be to look at sports, as a hilarious, maybe not hilarious, but as a good driver of what you need, right? To understand that statistics don't tell the full story, and you need context for them. Just look at, say, I don't know, the hot button statistic people always talk about is, let's use a sport that I actually do understand. I'll use American football to explain this, but to use, I don't know, points allowed for a defense. Now, I'm a fan of defense, and I think points allowed matters, right? I think this is the ultimate statistic, but I also think that it's context dependent. For example, you'll comb through all the records and you'll look at, why people don't consider the best, at least in the modern era. When I say modern era, I'm talking Super Bowl era. You'll look down and you'll see the 77 Falcons at, 9.2 points allowed per game, which is crazy impressive. And you're going to say, well, wait, why aren't they considered the greatest defense ever? Now, personally, I do consider them the greatest defense ever. But there are a few reasons why they aren't by the general population. First is that team didn't make the playoffs. In fact, they didn't even have a winning season. They were at 500. They won 7 games. They lost 7 games. Second reason is every defense in the league that year actually performed pretty darn well. A lot of defenses in that decade had their high watermark in 77. So there were quite a few defenses under 11 points per game. I think there was even a few under 10, but the Falcons had the best mark. And their offense was putrid. And when I say putrid, I mean people talk about offenses being bad a lot of times, and they have a reason to, say that hurts a defense. Um, that Falcons defense was that offense wasn't just bad as in they didn't provide much help. It would be more accurate to say punting on first down would have been more effective for that team than fielding an offense. And I may be exaggerating here, but that's how bad the offense was. That you could legitimately make the argument that they should have punted on first down every single time. But anyway, that's my tangent for the day over. Looking back at this, looking at the election, obviously Ukraine stuff is hurting him with all the impeachment talk, at least in the immediate effect. But we'll see what happens once things proceed a little bit further. But at least among independents, this is not a good look for Donald Trump, and it could hurt him in 2020. But I think what Republicans should be trying to do is just get this over with as soon as possible. And as soon as that's done, I expect his approval rating and disapproval rating numbers to return to where they've been, to that very narrow 1% to 2% range that they've been at the entire time. Specifically, the disapproval rating. I expect that to fall back to where it's normally been, and Donald Trump's approval rating to kind of rise back up to that by maybe 0.5% on average. Other than that, I can't really say much about this except Democrats definitely have a shot to make Trump a one-termer. Personally, I think it's more likely than it was before this stuff happened. But I tend to be a little bit safe and tend to err on the side of the incumbent when trying to forecast an election. In this case, who knows? So we'll see. Anyway, I want to thank all y'all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy. Bye.